Fantastic.
Oh, that's right. You can see on your side. I'm
I
I'm
can.
silly.
I'm
I'm very
looking at
silly.
you right now.
So silly. And of course,
Um,
now is when somebody's mowing the lawn. That's fantastic.
they just started.
Awesome.
You know what we
Awesome.
can do? We can
Is it
close the
Jason?
doors. No, our yard is already
Yeah, it's
been mowed
like,
pretty recently.
yeah, close all the doors.
We're just gonna lock ourselves in this room.
I'm good with that.
All right. Good deal.
Something to be said for older houses.
Yeah, that's remarkably
Yeah.
much better. Oof. All right, people are starting to say hello.
Oh, are we already recording?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I'm just here
I
fucking
said,
off. Don't
I
mind
said we're
me.
going live. I said you looked good.
One
You're
of the
right.
reasons
Center
I'm
on the
not doing the key
screen.
feed today is like I'm so wiped out. Like my brain is just not together. Part of it is wow, the I don't know if you were tuned in yesterday for the like try to make Keefe on the cheap. I'm a little disappointed because it was, I mean, that wasn't nearly as much work as like the regular Keefe, but this was enough work, and I was over the little saucepan for an hour, melting in frankincense into the honey and melting in pine resin and myrrh and everything else, and like getting it all and putting it out. And it's just not, it's not terrible, but it's not good. It's definitely not, it doesn't really smell like Keefe at all. And there's a thing that like it makes my head do when the Keffi's prepared properly. And I don't know if it's only one of the ingredients, if it's a combination of the ingredients, if it's the whole process, but that sort of like dream-like kind of bendy feel you get in the center of your head where like I don't know, like I can't describe it adequately, but there's a feel that the scent inspires in me. And I thought it was only me, but when I experimented with other folks in House Kepru, several people reported it. So long story short, because this isn't about Keefe today, the cheap Keefe was just not really a success. I'm
It was
gonna,
cheap, but it was not keefy.
yeah, I mean it's incense. Honestly, I don't even think it's good incense. Like I could smell the
Yeah.
frankincense, I could smell the myrrh, but it was just eh. Um, we'll see. I've got some other ideas. Questions.
Yeah, we've got questions.
Yay!
They're
We're
coming in.
here in the library and Inspiration House.
So before we get to a question, one person wanted to share with you that they're dying to tell you how much they love the tarot cards that they purchased a couple
Oh,
years ago.
yee.
So yay!
Thank you. A lot of work went into that. That was one of my bucket lists. One of my bucket list items of like, have been reading tarot since I was 14. I want to design my own deck. Uh, Funny story is I had actually designed a major arcana as an art project in high school, and it made it to a couple of art shows. And the only thing that remains puzzling to me is I know that it made it to several art shows and it was getting shown around, and I know it had gotten awards and ribbons because I still had the ribbons, and I never got the original cards back. And I'm really curious what Mrs. Zachariah did with my artwork. There was a whole bunch of stuff that year that all just went missing. So we will never see the tarot of the birds.
So the first question we got was actually, what is Inspiration House?
Oh, so what was it, 2 years ago now?
Yeah, 2 years and 1 month.
Yeah, 2 years ago and 1 month. Longer than that, I'd been looking for a space that was, I mean, ideally haunted. Also, like charming, cozy, large enough that people could come here, potentially sleep over for a weekend, and do weekend retreats. A place that could be my, for lack of a better term, my psychic Hogwarts. The place where I could instruct people and do like small group stuff and like weekend intensives. And when we had moved House Kepper's Gather from the airport Sheridan outside of Cleveland to Oberlin, Ohio, uh, we started, checking some of the Zillow listings and things, and a couple things popped up, and everything was, really neat and charming and old, but not quite right. And then we found this little brick house, And I'll be honest, this brick house was not quite, it's more Italianate than Victorian, and I had my heart set on a Victorian or a Tudor, and this was not the style I was aiming for, but when I walked through the doors, I knew this was the place. I had a strong sense that it was haunted in the nicest possible way, which was actually one of the really big things that I was looking for. I wanted a place that would be reliably active, that had intelligent spirits that would and could interact with people, but was not haunted in any kind of extreme way, because I wanted beginners to be able to come here, people who were not confident with their abilities to be able to come here and in a safe way engage with those abilities and engage with a haunted location. And Inspiration House fit that bill. It is 150 years old this year. It turned 150 this year. And it has been known variously throughout its history as the Arden House and the Penfield House. It was originally built by the Penfields. It's passed through a couple of different families. It's probably spent most of its lifetime in the Worcester family, mainly getting passed from female relatives to female relatives. So tracking that down was interesting since they didn't all have the last name of Worcester. And it's just cozy. This is the library. I've got my very fancy ox blood like recliner, which looks exceptionally expensive. Only we got it on, was this a bazaar, a house sale, estate sale?
That was actually Alan Campbell. He was having a sale. I went to pay him for some of the work he'd been doing for us and walked away with a chair and a
Yep.
cabinet and
Yeah,
a
we've had fun.
and
I'm a little bit of a bargain hunter. I think I get some of it from my great aunt Rita, who was very much like we would sometimes as afternoon things go driving around and go to places and just sniff out sales because there just wasn't anything else to do. And there weren't anybody my own age, there weren't any kids my own age. So it was just me and Rita tooling around, um, doing weird stuff. And I'm pretty sure I internalized some of that. So, I like antiquing is the wrong word because most antique stores are just a little too expensive for me. So going to Goodwill and Salvation Army and places where there's, uh, secondhand, really thrift stores, because honestly, I avoid the Salvation Army if I can help it for political reasons. But we have a fantastic Goodwill, and a lot of stuff here that looks really, really fancy came from the Goodwill for
oh yeah,
usually under $40.
usually under 20.
I am very proud of that $25 chair that I kind of
Mhm.
like teach my classes from.
Yep. Here's another question. Are you still doing work on vampires?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I mean, like my identity as a vampire hasn't stopped or changed. I will say that when I started working in the paranormal and the psychic shows, like vampire was not what they wanted to stick there because they expected no one to understand that or have context for it. So when I first started working with Paranormal State, like that was with full disclosure of all of the abilities that I have, my entire relationship with energy is tied up with what I call vampirism. Like this is my particular type of psychic is also tied in with this fairly complicated relationship with vital energy. And they were like, so does psychic medium sound right? Cool. And I was just like, mystic? Maybe anything else? No? Okay, so psychic medium is what I got to be called. Um, I do, I mean, I work with House Kepru still fairly extensively. I'm gonna admit that as far as like the greater vampire community as it currently stands, especially as it is expressed online, it's been a pretty big turnoff for me. The online vampire community is just full of so much crap. It used to be, when I was in my 20s and 30s, we would always ask ourselves, where are the 40 and 50 and 60-year-old vampires? Where are they? Why aren't they part of our community? Well, now that I am on the far side of 40, and just about to the edge of 50, I have to say I understand where they were. They were very tired of the kind of crap that happens where the 20 and 30-year-olds and the teens are like trying to like put their communities together in a way that appeals to them at that stage of their life. once you have a career and a family and, a house and like all of this other stuff to deal with, it's the politics and the wrangling and the pettiness just gets so exhausting. So I totally see why so many people, as they get older, just nope out of it. Like I occasionally like poke my fingers back in. I stay in contact with certain key people whom I've found reliable over all of the decades that I've been doing it. But there is a level of exhaustion to watching people try to reinvent the wheel every 3 years to create like this monolithic community or to create whatever they're doing. And like on one hand, I wish we could be a little bit more organized and a little bit have a little bit more solidarity. And I don't know, just never seems to come together.
For the people who aren't familiar with the
Mm,
vampire subculture
yeah.
outside of books and movies, can you talk about that a little
Okay.
bit?
So when I say vampire, I'm a vampire. I do not mean that I sleep in a coffin, that I have risen from the dead any more than anybody else who's had a near-death experience. I actually like garlic, so it's not like Dracula or Lestat or anything like that. It's English is an imprecise language, especially when it comes to psychic and paranormal phenomenon. Most of the words that we use for our experiences are borrowed words or sort of like awkwardly cobbled together. Vampire is one of them. I would argue that 50 years ago, witch was another one, and witch has become a little bit more mainstreamed. But vampire, when I use the term, it indicates a living human being who has the ability, like the innate inborn ability, to perceive vital energy, has a bias toward connecting to and working with the vital energy of other human beings, and also on top of that has a need to take some of that energy into themselves. We see some of that lampooned these days on What We Do in the Shadows, and as like funny and ridiculous as it is, it's pretty obvious that with their psychic vampire, their energy vampire, their emotional vampire on What We Do in the Shadows, that the writers have been paying attention to the books, to the interviews, to the documentaries, because some of those things are accurate as much as they're blown out of proportion. A psychic vampire is someone who interacts with others, and everybody exchanges energy when they interact. Every conversation you have, every intimate interaction you have, every argument, like we're constantly cycling energy, and that's business as usual. That is how it's supposed to work. We exchange energy with the world around us, with the plants, with the animals, with the very ground underneath our feet. There's a lot of key concepts of this that are expressed in Taoism, Buddhism, a lot of the Asian traditions and religions. And if you were kind of active in paranormal New Age psychic circles in the 90s, you might have read a book called The Celestine Prophecy, which also goes into this idea of energy as a force that we interact with and exchange. And the difference is something about a person who is vampiric. Either they don't process energy efficiently themselves, or something about them spends so much that they're always acting at a deficit, or they've got a chronic health issue, or a whole number of theoreticals. But the end result being they take more than they give, especially if they're not conscious about what they are and how they interact with this.
There's a clarifying
Yeah,
question. Is the energy you're talking about similar to Reiki type energy?
it's really different from Reiki. I have a Reiki 3 and I pursued that to figure out like, is this stuff that I could basically eat? Can I eat it? Because I need energy. And Reiki is a totally different energy. Like this, Reiki is an energy that is coming from outside of people, coming from a different source. People are channels for that energy and are essentially like drawing it down and shunting it for healing. But and this is actually the reason why I think the word vampire is appropriate for all of the messy baggage that it has. Vampires feed off of people. And the one thing that is really clear is the energy that I need and the energy that all of the other people I know who are actively vampiric, uh, they don't connect and process easily or even at all, with natural sources of energy. Um, it varies from person to person, but basically, the energy from other living people is what they need. And that's pretty much what they process. For me, I think of it as a digestion problem. Bear with me. Uh, your average person connects to a lot of different sources and they nurture them, and you don't even have to think about processing that energy. It's like breathing. You breathe in stuff from the world around you. You don't have to think about how your lungs are effectively taking that stuff and taking the oxygen out of it and then putting out all of the waste product. It's not a conscious thing. But if something about that breaks down, if something in your system doesn't work as well, you're very conscious of it. Or if there are certain foods you can't eat or certain steps in your digestion that don't work, you're really conscious about what doesn't work and you have to go 2 extra steps in order to get the nutrients or the sustenance that you need. And that has been probably the defining factor of most of the folks who are vampiric. As a psychic vampire, and I usually don't drop psychic vampire because for me, my identity as psychic, my experiences as psychic, like everything about my abilities, is wound up with this. So when you see me go to a place and pick up like what it feels like and the emotions that are left, and even like sometimes describe what the room looks like, what, in my opinion, my experience, I'm processing is the energy and the information encoded in that energy left behind first, not by the dead, even though I do a lot of stuff with hauntings, but most by the living. If you've been watching Portals to Hell recently, you'll probably see me with what you might have mistaken for either a mala or a rosary. It's a little bracelet of skulls. It's bone, and I've started using that to help remind myself to tune in on the spirits, on the dead, rather than simply pick up on the living, because that's my easier default, is to read the energy, the emotions, the thoughts, whatever, of the living people around me and the people who've been moving in and out of that space. Because something about me gravitates to that energy, can harness it, can read it, can drink it like a fine wine. As creepy as that might sound to some people, a lot of my personal journey with learning my abilities was one, coming to terms with that, and then kind of banging my head against the logistics of like what's actually going on with this, like what does this mean, and then bringing my relationship with energy into consciousness, where I could then choose when I take or if I don't take, how I exchange it, and what I'm doing when I engage with this very alchemical process.
Do you have any tips to help fend off or keep away energy vampires who, I would add to the question,
Mm,
who aren't behaving ethically?
yeah. I'm also pretty much like the voice for ethics in vampirism. So for the psychic vampire and actually the greater vampire community, I wrote the equivalent of the Wiccan Read, and have been consistently the person of like, don't be a dick, become aware of this. I'm not going to tell you that you can't exercise the way you want, but I'm going to tell you that it makes more sense for you to. So how do you protect yourself from people who are vampirizing your energy? I mean, the first thing I'm going to say is the majority of like bad psychic vampires, emotional vampires, just aren't conscious of what they're doing. They haven't put the time or effort, or honestly haven't had the circumstances in their life that allowed them to have that aha moment and go, oh shit, I'm doing this. This is real. It has consequences. Maybe I should make some choices. So unethical psychic vampires who either are completely unconscious of it or honestly are being dicks, because some of them, there are those out there. First thing is your average attack, it's going to be somebody within line of sight. Like it's somebody that you've interacted with fairly recently, within probably the last 15 or 20 minutes before you feel like there's something wrong with you. And that's honestly just because people are people, and it takes, for the amount of effort that it takes to attack someone like that, to feed off of them over a distance without a really useful focus, without having a strong connection to them, either physical contact or being able to focus on them visually in a space, the amount of effort and concentration that that takes, especially for somebody who's unconscious about what they're doing, it's too much. So most attacks are going to happen with somebody that you are interacting with right then or that you have recently interacted with. So your first line of defense, you feel like something's going on, move out of that room. Like just remove yourself from the space that you are in. Um, if somebody follows you as you try to move yourself from that space, pay attention. Like what's that person doing? Do they just sort of like keep wanting to talk to you and you still feel like crap and they won't seem to go away? That might be your psychic vampire. At that point, assert your boundaries. Speak up and disengage yourself from the interaction and the conversation with them. Some unconscious psychic vampires don't have really good personal boundaries, and you may have to be very firm about this. My default thing, and I recommend this to anybody, psychic vampire attack or not, like if you are in a space and you feel overwhelmed and you feel like something is really messing with your energy, duck into a bathroom, close the door, ideally like a solo bathroom where you can control the space around you, where you can calm yourself down, assess, do some grounding and centering and shielding and like reaffirm those boundaries around yourself. I find it useful to like run my hands under the water in the sink as just a really tactile experience to help get me back into my body and feels. And from there, sort of like assess, okay, how do I feel now? If I've removed myself from this situation, from whatever, like, where am I in my internal world? And if I open that door and go back out, how does that feeling change? Other techniques that I've taught people, because on the theory that it takes a thief to catch a thief, I know how feeding works. I know how you affect people's energy either through a touch from across a room, from across hundreds of miles if you've got a strong enough connection to them where you can concentrate well enough. Because let's be honest, like if you believe that you can do Reiki from a distance, you can do any type of energy work from a distance. It's not just sending something happy and fun to someone. It works on the same principle. So you can, on the same principle that someone sends Reiki at a distance, focus on someone from a distance and take energy. The amount of concentration or skill that that takes makes it a fairly rare occurrence. And it is typically somebody who has a pre-existing connection to you. So someone who is an ex, someone whose family that you had a complicated relationship with, and they have, think of it as like a little psychic tether that ties them to you, that makes it easier for them to sort of like close that distance regardless of where you're at. So it's possible, but I want to stress it's very rare. And again, the best way to protect yourself with it is really good boundaries. In most of the cases of like exes or family members who have that little tether to you, as much as you want to cut yourself off from them, you probably are ambivalent. You probably want to like, you don't have good closure. Maybe you're thinking about forgiving them, or like they're the king of second chances. You've given them 15 different chances to like change their ways in your life, and like a part of you just doesn't want to cut that tie. But if you feel that there is a vampiric aspect, if their very existence, like their attention on you, is somehow sending negativity your way or taking things from you, you need to cut that. Cut the cord, have a hard line of no more. Make your own closure by I will not be affected by this person anymore. And that can include like removing reminders of them in your life so that you're not thinking about them. And therapy can help to like get a really good sense of how to develop those emotional boundaries because your psychological state, your psychological health significantly shores up your energetic ability to say, fuck off, no.
So we're actually getting inundated with questions about psychic energy and psychic vampires.
Okay.
It's fantastic. You're
Yeah,
also answering a bunch of them as usual.
as I do.
Before
Okay,
I pass
cool.
them on with words. Do you have any tips for how to draw those boundaries with family members who, even if you're not in the same space, they're
Whew.
still...
Okay, so I'm gonna. Yesterday was my grandmother's birthday, and it was
I
Mother's
didn't
Day.
know that.
Yeah, I don't celebrate it. I celebrate Christmas.
That's her. Yeah.
Yeah. So I often talk in very rosy terms on how I grew up in a family where psychic abilities were okay, and actually encouraged. And I've told really like kind of heartwarming stories because my grandmother did have some very significant impact on my understanding of my abilities. She taught me some amazing things. She was also a horrible person, completely emotionally wrecked, and did irreparable damage not just to myself but to pretty much every member of my family she came into contact with. She was bad, undiagnosed whatever was wrong with her, but it was significant. There are aspects of my childhood I will not talk about, just because they're so far over the top that you're not going to believe it anyway. But end result being, there came a point in my life where there was no choice but to cut all ties. Um, and for me, I realized, okay, here was the quandary. My grandmother was not just psychic; like she had a special skill for getting her hooks into people. She could read you from a distance. She could attack you from a distance if you were doing what she disapproved of, and she cheerfully did so. She used it to control her kids, in sort of a mommy dearest way. And by the time my mom and her generation had become adults, my grandmother had sort of graduated to collecting all of their kids like postage stamps. She didn't trust any of them to have their own kids or raise their own kids, so she took me from my mom and she took my little brother who was a cousin. Actually, my first cousin took him from his dad, tried to take two more. I mean, like it was a shit show. Coming from all of that, as someone who, I think the worst part of it is I still loved her. I think that's the hardest part about problematic family, is on some level you love who they could have been, who you see they should have been, and you desperately want that to be real, and that can destroy you. Um, and they absolutely, like abusive family members really bank on that to wear down your boundaries, to like go, but don't you love me? Why are you pushing me away? Shouldn't you be you should be bigger than that. You should forgive. You should let it go. And I'm here to tell you that if you are in a situation with a family member, a lover, a friend, it doesn't matter, anybody close to you who is emotionally abusive to you, who is manipulative to you, who is physically abusive to you, sexually, any of it, you need to think of it as a guillotine. Like, not just go, oh, I'm going to assert my boundaries and say no. Assess the situation. You may need to just get the fuck out. Abusive family members, especially, abusive spouses, especially, will create these situations where you must remain with them, so that even if you are setting those boundaries and you're saying, okay, I'm not going to put up with this today, you're still under the same roof, you're dependent on them, you can't get away. So in the same way that I say, like if somebody has vampirized you and you're in the same room, it's probably somebody in the same room with you, you probably need to get out first, physically get out. Um, there was a period in 1997 where I was homeless. Eddie Fate, who is the creator of Pugmire, will be able to verify this because I was no longer sleeping in parks because he and his girlfriend at the time took me in. And I wouldn't be where I'm at right now without Eddie and a couple of friends who helped out. So it is terrifying to take that free fall and to set the boundaries so sternly that you may have nothing else, but you still have you. I just packed some stuff up in my minivan and I got the fuck out of Dodge. So what do you do? How do you create those boundaries? The first step is realizing that you deserve to have them, that it is your right to be able to say, no, I am not comfortable with this. No, I am not taking this anymore. That, you know, I don't know how it is for anybody else, but like with what I grew up with, it took me until college and talking with other people to realize that any of it was abusive because it's all I knew. And I've heard that story from so many other people. And the hard part is as you grow up with stuff like that, it also makes it really easy to slip into consistently abusive patterns with people, just letting them take advantage of you because it, well, you can put up with it, you can take it, you've taken worse. You've seen other people take worse. So it's, it's survivable, right? First step, realize just because you can endure it doesn't mean you should or that you are obligated to. That's your first boundary right there. You have a right to something better, that you have a right to be loved for who you are. You have a right to have people around you who support you rather than tear you down. That you have a right to flourish rather than feel trapped. That's your first boundary. And from that, like once you can go, I deserve more than what I've got right here. This is not okay. From that, assess like, what do you need to do to put yourself in a better place so you can take what is probably going to be a lifelong struggle of repairing all of your inner and outer defensive that have been worn down throughout your entire life, of reconstituting your skin, your ability to say, no, really, that's not cool. Stop calling me those names. And then your ability to take those names that you've internalized the whole time, stupid, worthless, whatever, you've heard them so long, like you probably recite them to yourself. I know I do. Part of those boundaries is also working on that internal dialogue and stopping being your own abuser simply because that's all you knew. So, and the thing is that's not an easy thing to do solo. And I know that therapy is not a comfortable prospect for everybody, and not all therapists are created equal. There are definitely people who will just like throw a bunch of pills at you or tell you you need Jesus or whatever. And there's another secret with that. You don't have to settle for just the first therapist you grab. That's to some extent the abuse talking. I obviously here's the person who's in charge and I need to listen to them now and that's my only option. No, actually you have every fucking right to go, nah, this person's not working for me. I want someone who can speak to me. And the thing is we're actually at a point in time where there's a lot more folks who are working in the mental health industry who are much more open-minded, much more willing to explore different perspectives and different pathways. I strongly recommend anybody who has a background in what is called cognitive behavioral therapy, because that's really about just training yourself to rethink, retraining how you think about your life, your emotions, what you are, what you deserve. But understand it's probably going to be a lifelong thing. If you have been in a situation where you've been taken advantage of, abused, talked down to, any of these things, like the whole laundry list, um, even if you don't think it was really all that bad because you saw it worse on other people, understand that's worn down your boundaries. So you're going to spend some time putting that back together. Your emotional health, your mental health, that's where you have to start if you want to build the shields that I talk about when I talk about grounding, centering, shielding. Like this life, emotional, mental, all of that comes first, and the rest of it follows. If you try to just build those boundaries without dealing with all of the things that have been chipped away in here, they're always going to be flimsy. They're always going to be broken because you're still broken.
I think that's actually a perfect segue to. There have been
Yeah.
a couple of questions, which is fascinating,
Yeah.
about shadow work.
Okay.
And do you have any tips on how to start to approach shadow work, including specifically, can past life regressions be useful in shadow
Mm.
work? Um, so where would you
Okay.
recommend starting?
Oh God, where would I start with shadow work? So, oh God, ages ago, actually, I think it's in A Winding Path of Words, because it was one of the articles that, like, it was published in such a tiny little, like, fly-by-night magazine that I'm like, I want to have it out in the world. That's, uh, in January, I got a wild hair up my ass to like make what 5 books, and one of
Oh
them,
my God, one month,
yeah,
5 books.
yeah, one of them
Yeah.
was it didn't seem like too much because a lot of it was just compiling stuff that was already there. One of them is called A Winding Path of Words, and it is a collection of previous articles. And the only reason I bring that up, I'm not like by my book, although it might be useful to read the article. Um, it was about shadow work, like the metaphor I use for people who are like, what the fuck is shadow work? Shadow work is inspired by Carl Jung, Jungian psychology. Uh, you've probably heard of Freud's idea of like the ego and the id and different parts of the personality. Jung elaborated on that in several different directions, and a key one involves the shadow. Not the radio play character, but the part of your mind, the part of your psyche that represents, for many people, the dark or forbidden or scary parts of your personality that you sort of like shove over in a corner. It's important to note that your shadow isn't always dark. Your shadow is simply what you don't want to accept, that you don't want to look at, that you don't want to make a part of you, or you've been trained to reject. So honestly, my shadow, at least a part of my shadow, you get to see regularly when I'm around Illyria because it's happy-go-lucky, silly, and ridiculous, and often full of bad puns. Because I was a very dark and broody goth, and clearly serious people were not allowed to also be silly. So understand first that your shadow isn't always going to be all the dark stuff. Your shadow is the stuff that you, for one reason or another, don't want to look at, have pushed away, have suppressed, or have been trained to do so by family, by society, by religion. Okay, the next Jungian thing is Carl Jung represented your psyche as a house. And your main consciousness was the upper part of the house. And so think of it as, how you are the house that you live in. And subconscious and unconscious are the basement and like the deeper parts. The best metaphor I have for shadow work is think about having to go down to your basement and you have to clean it out. You have to find all those boxes and all the broken furniture or even the good furniture. It didn't have a space in the upper part of the house, or maybe somebody gave it to you and you couldn't quite throw it out and you just shoved it down in a corner back there. Only it's your basement, so you don't go down there often, which means that it's dusty and it's got cobwebs and there's probably some mice and some spiders and other icky things you don't want to poke at. Shadow work is like that. When you first start digging around in the deeper parts of yourself and your mind and your identity, you're going to be a little repulsed. You don't poke at these thoughts or these feelings often. So pulling them out to the surface, pulling them out into the light to look at is a kind of dirty, thankless task at first. Um, Therapy can help with shadow work. It is not, the exclusive route to shadow work. Regressions and meditations and ways of bringing like suppressed memories forward can be a part of shadow work. But I really think the first step to shadow work is accepting that who you are right now, who you are presenting to the world, asking yourself the hard question of, but what am I not showing people? And from that, asking yourself, what am I not showing me? And then the next question, why? What am I afraid of? And just slowly chipping away. Is this all who I am? Like, is this face that I'm fronting. I mean, we know that's not true. We all show different faces depending on, are we at work? That's one personality. Are we with certain friends? That's another personality. We know that we're not just one thing. We don't fit neatly in a single box. We don't have a single label that fits. Shadow work is admitting that there's things that we just don't even want to put a word to and finding the words anyway. And often finding the compassion to understand why you didn't want to look at it in the first place, to give yourself the kindness, the benefit of the doubt, to go, okay, so this is a part of me, and maybe you don't have to still like it. I'm, I'm, I have a lot in common with my grandmother. Whether I learned it by example or if it's something that runs in the family, like I have a mean streak, I have a sadistic streak, I have a very vengeful and petty streak, and if left to my own devices, I get incredibly passive aggressive. And I am very aware of this. A lot of my shadow work is going, okay, these are parts of who I am. It doesn't mean I have to act on them, but I do need to know that they're there so I can make a conscious choice of not expressing them, even though that's my default. Uh, oh, there's a Jung quote that I'm gonna destroy about illumination is not like bathing the world in light, but it's making the darkness conscious. And that's a terrible paraphrase of it. But a lot of shadow work and to me, a lot of personal development, whether you're on a mystical path, a spiritual, religious path, whether your path happens to be the path of therapy, all of this process of becoming a whole, healed, complete person is looking at the pieces that are broken or that you see as broken, understanding why they're there, bringing them into consciousness so that you know the full shape of them, their potential to hurt and to harm, as well as to heal or to help. And then being able to confidently put them back where you don't have to focus on them all the time, but you know that they're there. You know what their name is. You know if there's a use and when that use might come up.
Can you? There was a question
Yeah.
about how being a psychic vampire affects your relationships that I think
Mm.
you've touched on in a couple ways already, but people are definitely interested.
Well, I mean, so after the live stream yesterday, I joked to Illyria that Illyria is an everlasting gobstopper, which, as ridiculous as it is, like I don't know if you've noticed, but Illyria is just this buoyant, bubbling font of energy and just nonstop. Like Illyria's idea of a good day is, I'm bored, I'm gonna run 26 miles on the elliptical. Uh, and then while I'm at it, like create 15 different spreadsheets and found three nonprofits because why not?
My God, that sounds like so much fun.
Right? Like you do this like every day. Like you don't sit still. I don't know.
Try.
It's crazy. Um, so how does it affect my relationships? I need a regular amount of energy from another person or multiple people. Uh, First thing being, and this I had in common with my grandfather, is and it's actually something you'll find in a lot of folks in the vampire community. Uh, while the act of taking energy from another person, feeding from a person with their consent, is not by itself inherently damaging to them. Actually, it can be done in a way that it is revitalizing and helpful, very soothing. The best circumstance, like, just kind of gives you that, like, cozy, relaxed, I want to curl up with my favorite blanket and just, and it's a good thing. It's like a great massage when it's consensual. The downside is different folks who are vampiric have different levels of need, different amounts that they need to take. And I learned pretty early on that if most single individuals, if I was taking what I needed regularly from them, eventually it chipped away at them enough that it did cause problems for them. That it wore them down. It made them exhausted. They slept too much. They would start getting sick. Like it had immune and autoimmune repercussions. So it became really obvious that I needed to have more than one donor. That's the general term in the community is that the people who give energy are donors, um, which led to I mean I've been a lifelong uh, polyamorist. I am not monogamous by my nature. I have a very different approach to like I'm also not a sexual being really. Like I'm more asexual than I'm anything else. Like I that's a whole other kettle of fish. But I mean, long version is having multiple people with whom I can have at least semi-intimate contact. I mean, to take someone's energy is very intimate. It doesn't have to be like clothes off, sexy times intimate, but I'm still getting the essence of the person, like how they feel, sometimes what they're thinking about, often emotions. And that's an exchange that's very, outside of what we think of as standard friendship. It's certainly not like something you'd want to do, cold with a coworker. I can't count the number of times when I was lecturing on vampires at colleges that some like well-meaning student who had attended the class would be like, take energy from me," and I'm like, first of all, you're 18, you don't know really like even what you're asking. That's an uneven power dynamic. No way. Second of all, I don't really know you. Like, why would I wouldn't just go up and randomly kiss somebody who is like, hey, this sounds like fun. That's not me. I've got very different boundaries for that. So one, it has definitely influenced my stance of being polyamorous, of being okay with having multiple partners, multiple like close, like more than friend relationships. It definitely has been the death of some relationships in the past where it was clear to me that like the way I operate was not working for the other person and was over time just going to hurt them. And there's a couple of people I still care very deeply about that I was like, fly, be free. This is not the place for you to be. And that took a lot to be able to get to that. To be frank, it took a number of really terrible relationships that ended poorly because I hadn't realized that it was either getting codependent or that it really was wearing the person down and we were just starting to get snippy with one another. Like it was a steep learning curve. Uh, I mean, at this point, me and relationships go in with full disclosure of like, okay, so, hi, I'm a vampire. It's okay if you don't believe that. But if you notice that you start getting really sleepy around me, you sleep more than usual around me, if you have a headache or if like you're in physical contact with me and that starts feeling weird, please poke me because I'm comfortable enough with you that I'm forgetting that I maybe need to do that more consciously. And usually like I don't have a relationship without it also being a vampire donor relationship. It's just it, given my level of need, it's just not fair.
I will also say that as someone who has way too much energy, it's kind of amazing to be able to snuggle someone and just fall asleep.
Yes.
Like, it's so cool. But I think, yeah, if for someone with less
Yeah.
energy to begin with, it can be damaging.
Yeah.
And it can definitely be damaging if you don't know what you're getting into.
Yeah, my grandfather's solution, and let me full disclosure, I didn't know that my grandfather was vampiric like me until my 20s, and he didn't actually know that psychic vampires, like he didn't know what the term was. He just had been kind of dealing with this his whole life. Um, his solution was to just sort of maintain multiple partners all over the place. And since he came from a generation where he couldn't just say, "Hey, I'm doing an energy thing with you," he masked what he was doing through sex. That's not uncommon, especially in the vampire community. Like, especially for people who have partners who don't believe it, who are not coming from a worldview where this is okay. It's really not uncommon for a lot of amps to feed sexually through sexual contact because it is a powerful exchange. And there's a lot of energy that's generated with that. Not quite my deal. Uh, I mean, I did a lot of like active, open, overt feeding in the BDSM kink community when I didn't have a full-time partner. There's a power exchange that's part of that culture. The boundaries are well established. The understanding that these are not necessarily like long-term intimate relationships. They don't even have to be sexual relationships. Was like written right into it, and so that worked very well for me. And I spent a lot of time also teaching in that community, along with other fantastic presenters like Lee Harrington or Raven Caldera, who are also vampiric, who also have a similar relationship with energy, and who also explore that relationship in terms of power dynamics and power exchange, and shamanic and ordeal path and a whole bunch of. If you're at all intrigued by any of this, I recommend looking up Lee Harrington and Raven Caldera and both of their work, because they're different perspectives. They're very fantastic perspectives, and they are much more entrenched in the kink community than I am at this point because I'm more of a spokesperson now for the paranormal. And it's not that I'm not in the kink community. I'm very much like that's my lifestyle, and I have to kind of pick where I'm teaching. There's only so much time in a day.
Yeah, there have actually been multiple questions also, so I'm not going
Yeah.
to read all of them. But questions about how to feed either in quarantine
Oh God, yeah.
or how to deal with the need to feed when you're around people that you can't safely take energy from.
So for the quarantine, I ended up. I've gotten a lot of questions about this. I wrote up a couple of like easy things. The dream walking book that I have, one of the reasons why dream walking also appears in the Psychic Vampire Codex is also why I recommend doing this with consent. If you've got someone who you have a connection to, somebody that there's a pre-established connection, even better if it's a previous feeding partner, and you happen to be at a distance from one another, it is possible to reach out to them in the hypnagogic state, light trance state, or through dreams, and basically close the distance so that you could have the energetic exchange that you need without being physically in the same room. It's a little tricky. There is a certain expenditure of energy that goes into it. So if you're in like pure starvation mode, it may be really hard to do, um, because it does take a little bit of gas in your tank in order to drive off and fill your tank up. There was a technique that I would use in college. So there's feeding directly off of a person, and then there's ambient feeding. Everybody's engaging in energy and energy exchange, and there's a certain point where the energy from a person has radiated off of them like heat and light from a candle flame. So you're not just like sticking your finger in the candle, you're just kind of warming your hands around it. And ambient energy is no longer directly attached to any person, even though it's still human energy, it's still flavored with it, it's still what you need. So when you can't go to like, a crowded nightclub or a sports game or a shopping mall and just sort of like graze off of the ambient energy that's come off the crowd. In college, I would lay back, I would do a light trance, and I would sort of cast this net. Again, it requires a certain expenditure of energy on your part. Little tendrils of energy to just sort of like gather what was in the space around me. It works best in densely populated areas. If you're in an apartment building, if you're in a dorm, it's much trickier in suburbia and really hard in rural areas. But to just sort of try to have, as much as you can gather from what's just free floating in your area, to get you by, to try to get by. Uh, there are different people who are vampiric have different levels to which they can and cannot make use of energetic sources that are not strictly human. Um, I'm on a pretty extreme spectrum. There's a lot of energy I can harness. I can use it to do stuff for other people. It's how I can do the Reiki 3 thing. Like I can connect to it. I can shunt it through me. I can't use that to sustain me. I can't. I can do a lot of stuff in the natural world. I can connect to it. It doesn't. It still doesn't feed me. Like I can't digest it. And there's reasons. That's complicated. We won't worry about that. And all of that's speculation and conjecture anyway. So if you are vampiric and you're in a position where you have no other options, it won't hurt to experiment with other sources beyond people. So try going out somewhere, and there's a Taoist exercise where you match the movement of your walking and your breathing, and you are consciously exchanging energy with the ground beneath your feet and the trees and the natural world around you. Give it a shot because it can't hurt. Um, Make sure that you're nourishing your body like as well as you possibly can, with fresher foods. And again, it's not going to be a perfect fix, but it can help a little bit. I know that there's a number of sanguine vampires because, yes, there are folks who identify as vampires who drink small amounts of human blood with the consent of the people who are donating that, with a whole lot of medical protocols, um, who swear by making sure that they get, multivitamins, B12, various supplements that are helping the body with the way in which it breaks down and processes energy on like a significantly like molecular physiological level. So take care of your body as much as you can to sort of like work with and around the fact that other parts of you may be in privation. Um, Try dream walking, try long distance feeding. Please do that only with the permission of the people that you are working with. If there's an energy worker who you have connection to, who you're willing to experiment with, it's been my experience there's something innately necessary for vampiric people that they are the ones taking the energy, not just having it shoved at them. And as silly as it might sound, it's the difference between eating your sandwich and having it like injected into your veins. Like there's a process there that has to happen. But again, in privation, it doesn't hurt to experiment. So if you have friends who are energy workers, see about maybe meeting them halfway. If they're going to send energy to you, then grab that and pull that in and see if it helps. Um, it's really interesting to me that a lot of folks that I know who are vampiric have a really mixed reaction to Reiki. Uh, I don't have a really good reason for it. It's not, absolutely every person, but I know enough people who don't respond well to Reiki or don't respond the same way to Reiki, who happen to be vampiric, and something about that energy just doesn't quite click for them. There are pretty prevalent theories in the vampire community that at least some of the folks who are vampiric have the problems they do with different types of energy, natural energy, energy from the world around them, simply because they're not necessarily from around here. Like they're they are beings having a human experience, and something about their innate nature doesn't quite click with everything here. And so they need to go to different lengths to get what they need to make everything work on the level of body, mind, and spirit. Uh, and I'll let you kind of dig into that a little deeper if you want. I acknowledge that's kind of like the deep end of the pool as far as like belief and interpretation goes.
Hmm. There's been a good number of questions about psychic abilities,
Yeah,
but also, I think before we get to those,
yeah,
there have been some really interesting points about the overlap of abilities. One person was asking if empaths can also be vampires. Another was asking if her psychic abilities are related to being a vampire. So I
Mm.
thought maybe addressing those questions at the same time might make some sense.
Um, so I get empaths and vampires really feel like two halves of the same coin. Uh, Interestingly, I've done a lot, obviously, a lot of like poking around and research and anecdotal stuff. A lot of folks who are vampiric, quite a number of them have a parent who is some type of psychic and frequently empathic. My mom was an empath. It's actually how I really understand how the empath stuff works. A lot of my abilities really mimic, like there is, I fit the bill for empathic with a lot of the ways in which I can read emotion off the energy that I'm taking. There's a great deal of emotional information that comes with that for me. Uh, and the difference to me between an empath and a vampire. An empath is someone who's so finely tuned that they resonate with the emotions of the people around them. And it will feel like they're taking them in. Those emotions feel like they're their emotions, that they're inside of them. But they are inside of them in the same way that a note struck in a room also resonates in the body of a finely tuned violin. The note's out there, but you're so finely tuned, you're also echoing it. You're not eating it. With vampires, that information, that emotion is part of something else that you're pulling in. And a key difference is most empaths feel overwhelmed. They feel drained by being exposed to this stuff. The more emotion and energy around them, the harder it is for them to function. Um, the point where they become oversaturated is where they will experience a lot of like negative physical, mental, and emotional problems. For a vampire, you'll know for sure if you start getting cut off from that. Even if, like me, you are an introvert and you really don't like people, like being around people on a certain level is exhausting, but it doesn't drain you like it does for an empath. People energize you. And being shut away from them, you will notice that you kind of like go through these layers of not just withdrawal, but you get tired more easily. You get sick more easily. You kind of curl in on yourself, and your abilities start to, uh, it descends through an interesting, kind of predictable path. First, you get really hypersensitive because it's not that your psychic abilities have gotten tuned up, it's that your ability to shield yourself has gotten worn away. You don't have enough energy to do that anymore. So at first, you're just in this like, screw it, I don't want anything around me, everything hurts because I can't shut it out anymore because I'm starving. Because that's one of the first things to go. And then those abilities dull because those require energy as well to sustain them. And then you just sort of feel like a lump, and it kind of goes from there. Uh, Chronic depression is not uncommon for somebody who's a psychic vampire and is starving. Like you've gotten so cut off from people and from that interaction, and you've hit and gone past the point where like everything is just needles on your skin to the point where it feels like you're just stupid because nothing works in your head anymore, and then you just lose the wherewithal to even get up and go do anything. I've watched and actually worked with folks who were vampiric who had like kind of starved to the point where they couldn't even expend the energy necessary to connect to another person to feed. And that's just like the worst possible scenario. What I will say is, like for psychic vampires, you probably won't die of it, but it can have a cascade effect on, especially autoimmune stuff. And so, like, you can get pretty sick. I've I ended up in the hospital. It was one of the aha moments for me. So, okay, uh, can your psychic abilities be tied up with your identity as a vampire? Absolutely. I think for psychic vampires, they are inextricable. I mean, it'd be pretty shitty if you had to feed off of stuff that you had no ability to perceive, interact with, harness, direct, or otherwise. Like, so this is a cluster of things. Interestingly, there's some Taoist stuff that I'd been reading, particularly a book called Opening the Dragon Gate. There was another one called Gathering of Cranes, which was a collection of interviews with different Taoist elders. But Opening the Dragon Gate was the one that was most interesting to me because it was talking about how, like, the more you refine your energy, the more you hone your abilities, the more you, like, intensify what you can do, the more fuel you need to sustain that. And I think that that's very much true in the case of a number of folks who are vampiric. You know, we don't have a culture where we think about having to take energy, like consciously take it from the environment around us, consciously take it from people around us. So if you're someone who happens to be incredibly psychic, your psychic abilities cost some energy. Like there's an expenditure there to do that stuff, to shield yourself, to interact, whatever. And if you happen to be in a body that is chronically ill, it does not necessarily sustain the expenditure, so you need to make up the difference. If you happen to be in a body that for some reason isn't processing the energy right, it has to make up the difference. Like there's a bunch of different reasons why one might become vampiric, but the end result is cluster of abilities, need for energy.
It's funny because I've just been looking at the 3 questions that just popped up about how you can tell if you're a psychic vampire. And, well, now you know.
I mean, yeah, the best test would be first take some time to go, okay, how am I interacting with the world around me on an energetic level? How am I interacting with, people just in conversation, intimately, whatever? Okay, when am I taking energy? Okay, identify that. Spend a day, just one day, consciously not engaging in that exchange. Like, just don't take. Resist the urge to do it. See what that does to you. If it has a pretty obvious visceral, like, holy shit, I feel fucked up, you you probably have a need to do that. No, there will be arguments that, like, everybody is exchanging energy at all times, and that is true. But if you notice that in your case it's a really steep curve, consider that vampirism is a part of how you function. Another point I want to make is it is possible to become vampiric but temporarily so, where your energy through either a chronic health issue or just something that you're going through, where your energy is so depleted that you have to take in order to try to build yourself back up. You'll see this also in people who have been the victim of long, persistent psychic attack, being fed upon, uh, being fed upon by spirits. It's not just living vampires. A lot of spirits can and do drain our energy. A lot of the more distressing things about spirit attack, spirit obsession, even possession, is that it's taking something from you. If that is allowed to happen over a long enough period of time, it wears you down to a point where you start to manifest these symptoms as well, where you have basically temporary vampirism because on a psychic level, you need a blood transfusion. And if you have enough ability, you can take that and kind of proactively heal yourself. You'll do it unconsciously, unintentionally. If you've ever done end of life care or visited a relative who's been in the hospital for an extended period of time and really has gotten worn down, pay attention to how exhausting that visiting them may be, even if they're not necessarily engaging with you. Uh, a family member who's been on life support for a while or is uh, in a coma, what does that room feel like to you? Not just the harsh oppressiveness of the emotional reality of it. What does it do to you energetically to be in that space? Think about how you react when you leave. Think about how you feel before you go in. We can become vampiric in situations like that. It's very natural to start to suck energy because the body's not sustaining itself properly in other ways. So don't rule out chronic illness as like a temporary thing. As you start to like put yourself back together and heal yourself, you can it's a temporary state, and it's just not temporary for everybody. It's not necessarily a bad thing either. I really want to stress that because it is one of those things that starts to sound kind of like a spiritual handicap or over medicalized. I firmly believe that there are Illyrias in the world who have way too much, and that's actually as detrimental to them as people who don't have quite enough. And again, that flux and flow, the way in which everybody interacts, there are benefits to having energy taken away from a person. There are benefits to having energy given to people, and it's really the circumstance. It's really how you do it. Uh, the word vampire is the best word we have in English right now for this, but there are other words in other cultures that make a little bit more sense, some of which have unfortunately culturally appropriative connotations right now. But if you do some reading on world traditions about shamanic practices, the shaman is usually described as a wounded healer, a walker between. They're often someone who's had a near-death experience. Like death and rebirth is a significant part of shamanic initiation. And shamanic people, these paths, kind of put you with one foot in the spirit realm. You have the ability to heal, but a lot of that ability is from learning how to heal yourself. And a number of shamanic techniques are not merely about putting energy into a person, but it's learning how to take the right stuff out and having the ability to do that. My religious studies uh, pre-master's work was on shamanism as a mystical experience that kind of manifests in multiple cultures. And reading on shamanic practice, especially with writers like Holger Calveit, uh, Mircea Eliade is a little dated in some of the perspectives, but Calveit's stuff really made some stuff stand out. With here is if we had a different cultural approach, if we looked at it differently, I think the vast majority of people that I'm describing as psychic vampires, if we had a word for shamanic experience, a context for it in this culture, we would recognize ourselves as that.
So people are asking for some more resources on how to manage energy
Mm,
and also how to honestly figure out if you are a psychic vampire. I've already mentioned
yeah,
the Psychic Vampire Codex and the Psychic Energy Codex.
yeah.
Are there any other?
Raven Caldera has a book called The Ethical Psychic Vampire that I recommend is good. That guy mowed his lawn, and now my sinuses are like. Um, we sat down to record. Everything had been perfect and quiet, and then the neighbor brought out like the riding mower. Uh, so yay. Um, what else is out there? Um, Vampires today. It's less about uh, practical vampirism, like how do I handle this, and more. It's by a fellow, Dr. Joseph Laycock. It's a really good outside look at the community and the identity. And I strongly recommend poking at it if you get the chance. Who, what else is out there? There's just not a whole lot. I mean, I don't want to say like I know that there are resources online, but for as many good resources as there are online, there's a lot of crap.
Well, actually,
Yeah.
uh, this is a perfect time to talk about the class
Oh,
because
okay. I guess I have now a
well, no, I
commercial.
mean
True.
it follows precisely
Yeah.
all the questions.
Because a lot of people have been asking questions like this, I am starting a 5-part course. It starts this Saturday. It's what, an hour?
It's so it's a 2 hour block with the
Okay.
last hour to hour and a half, or last half hour to
Being,
hour
yeah,
being
being
more
question and answer
questions, specifically
because,
questions about energy and energy work, because the class is about healing with
yeah.
energy.
So it's going to start from like what is energy? How do we interact with it? What are some cultural views on it? Different worldviews, and all of these questions are part of that. And it builds through the stages of, okay, so what is energy? How do I sense it? How do I work with it? How do I use it to heal myself? Because I believe you need to learn how to use it to heal yourself before you learn how to heal other people with it. There's a lot of like key things. Not that I'm advocating experimenting with yourself, but like you need to know how it feels before you know how it feels when you're doing it right on somebody else. On up to a fairly complicated technique that I've called meta surgery, which is basically psychic surgery. It's working with the energy body, chakras, the channels, and finding ways to address blockages and problems to assess, because we're not all built the same. Is this energy system that looks radically different from mine perfectly okay and working for this person, or is this energy system that looks radically different from mine broken and in need of fixing? And then how do I do that? How do I work with what this being needs? Um, it's several steps. I don't want to say it's beyond Reiki. It's a very, very different approach. Reiki gives you this awesome ability to just like, I am channeling energy, and this energy knows where to go to fix stuff. Like it just kind of does the thing without too much oversight and meddling. And meta surgery is where when you have the confidence and knowledge of how the energy body goes together and how that interfaces with the physical body, and where uh, your energetic health and your physical health like overlap and intersect, and you have the confidence of knowing like when you can kind of get your fingers in there and be a little bit micromanagey of how to fix certain things. And yeah, so that's because I don't know if you could tell, but this work is stuff that I've been doing for quite some time. I've put a lot of work and effort into learning the ins and the outs of it. Obviously with personal investment, like reason of like how the fuck does this shit work? Why do I need to take energy from people? Why do I have to be like everybody's universal cure for insomnia? And does that necessarily make me a bad person?
So there are a couple of other fun questions
Okay.
about TV shows. So a
Okay.
bit of a topic jump,
All right. I like fun questions.
or maybe not, because they're still all about energy. Uh, of all the TV shows you've been on, what's one that you've really enjoyed and why?
I mean, honestly, I really, really like working on Portals to Hell because one, Katrina really understands my process. Jack is incredibly supportive and open-minded. And so, like, once he understood what my process was, he has become like my 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 defender on it. Like, he makes sure that like all of I'm really extra when I'm doing psychic work for these shows in the sense that I don't want to be told anything if it is possible, and that's usually not how this stuff works. At the very least, on some level they have to be like, hey, we're calling you up to see if you can go to this place, and we need to have like some little interchange of like, have you ever been to this town? Because they can't say, have you ever investigated blah blah blah, blah house. We did that with oh, they were so mad. um they let me know I was going to Trans Allegheny Lunatic Asylum, because like how else do you ask, have you ever been to this random middle of the nowhere place in West Virginia? Anyway, I really like working with Portals to Hell because they let me experiment, and really play with the limits of the ability. as well as like the limits I like to set myself. So minimizing my contact with the crew is helpful because as if you've been here for this whole conversation, the first thing I pick up because of the type of psychic that I am is the energy from the living people. The most recent people there are going to be the loudest. So the crew around me, it's incredibly easy for me to pick up on their energy. So with some earlier shows, I was never 100% sure if the reading I was getting was of the space, was of the spirits, or was of the expectations of the crew who were hovering around me thinking really hard. Because sometimes it's really hard to block out, especially since that's kind of my default to pick up. They were curious about like this little weird widget that I made for myself. I'm usually not one to have a lot of like gadgets and toys, but like the little skull mala that I've got to go. I am focusing on the dead things and not on the live things. Jack and Katrina weren't like, "Wow, that's weird." They were like, "Cool. What is this? I want to hear more about it." So I really like that. I've had some negative experiences. Probably the most negative experience was on a Joe Rogan show. You won't see me because they just shot around me because when Joe Rogan questions everything, actually what he wants is to be able to question people he can make look like idiots. And he's got a pretty good sense for who he's not going to be able to make an idiot of. And therefore, if you ever see when he goes to the Ryan Institute, if you look carefully, I'm in the background. Also, they left me pretty much stranded in Raleigh, Durham for, I think, what was it, 5 days? Because weirdly, when I spoke up and said I needed to go catch my plane, since they've had me sitting around doing nothing for this interview I was supposed to do, as they just kept ignoring me and shoving me in corners, talking around me the whole time, I didn't have fun. Nobody listened. Like, I literally had to stand up and shout. Not once. Like like scream at them going, 5 minutes to get to the airport. Are you just gonna leave me here? So I've had some not so good experiences, and that one I'm not thrilled with. Anyway, I usually don't name names, but that one was like so far beyond the pale of piss poor treatment. And I've got some suspicions for why I got treated that way, and it wasn't just because I'm psychic.
uh, One person's curious, did you ever get to meet and talk to Lorraine Warren?
I did. On a couple of occasions, I got a chance to talk to Lorraine Warren. There, the first thing that made the best, well, actually, I met her first in 2006 at UNIFCON, kind of briefly and in passing, and it was when she was with, I forget the name of the priest, but he was one of the exorcists. He died like a year or two later. Um, so I got to meet her in passing. But she was on a couple of the Paranormal State episodes that I was on as well. The biggest impression she made on me was at one point we were in the same minivan, just sort of like waiting to be called on because as psychics we were usually like off doing our thing. And she spent, I don't know, probably a couple of hours talking about Einstein and Henrietta, her chickens, and Sir Isle of Skye, her spaniel. She had recently gotten Sir Isle of Skye. She adored her animals, and I mean, pretty much just regaled me with stories about her silly chickens. So Einstein and Henrietta, she was very, very distraught in this particular instance because she had dropped a pill or a part of a pill, and she was really worried because she couldn't find it that Einstein had eaten it. So like she was just kind of stressing about Einstein and whether or not he was going to be okay when she got home. And my other kind of benchmark experience with her was in, I think we were in North Carolina. I forget the name of the episode. It's the one where it was this house, and the family who'd owned it before had had an aunt that they pretty much just locked in a room and just waited for her to die. Like they didn't starve her exactly, but it was definitely elder abuse, and the haunting kind of surrounded that. Um, when we were doing dead time, I should say We did our walkthroughs separately because dueling psychics was a fun thing to kind of like see like what when you had two psychic people there, like what does Lorraine get? Okay, keep that separate. What do I get? Where do these two things intersect? Let's investigate the points of intersection because that's the likeliest place where there's really something going on. Um, so I should say that we both had walked through, and one of the rooms in the house, it was the daughter's room, felt like the most shielded from the phenomena. Like it was one point of calm in a house that felt kind of chaotic, despite actually being a very nice, neatly kept, really cute little home. Uh, when we did Dead Time, and there were a couple of things that I suspected because of just some books that the daughter had on shelves, a couple of posters that we had to cover up. I had some suspicions that maybe the daughter was into maybe some magic, maybe something. I wasn't totally convinced that it wasn't just, she also was just into heavy metal. We did Dead Time, and about halfway through, Ryan is in the daughter's room, and he's sitting on the on the bed, and I'm not sure why he like dug underneath the bed, but I think he was looking for something. Long story short, he pulls out, stacked one on top of the other, a Ouija board and several books on witchcraft. And immediately, immediately, Lorraine completely changes her interpretation on what is going on in this house because there's a Ouija board. And by Lorraine Warren's perspective of the universe, if it was a pack of tarot cards, if it was a Ouija board, if it was a witchcraft book, if it was anything vaguely involved in the occult, it had to be a portal and it had to be the source of the bad. And the bad was obviously going to be demonic because these things were really, really bad. Whoops.
Goodness.
That's my alarm for I don't know what.
Not important right now.
So I had already found by snooping around in the room, the daughter had a little altar that she had secreted in a jewelry box. I'd kind of poked in it and had already made the decision that I wasn't going to like let anybody else know that that was there because I didn't want them fucking with her altar. I discreetly mentioned to somebody, I'm like, I'm pretty sure the daughter has put some wards up in this room. I've got some suggestions that she's got a background and some stuff that she's at least, learning. And I was impressed with her wards. But I hadn't mentioned the little altar because, frankly, I didn't want anybody pawing through it. They were gonna, if I pointed it out. So Ouija board comes out, witchcraft books come out. Lorraine decides that clearly the daughter is dabbling with dark forces, and that is now why the house is haunted, even though that was not her opinion prior to finding the Ouija board. Stuff that I wish was not on the cutting room floor, lost to the ages, is the probably 45 minutes I spent sitting in the daughter's room on the bed next to Lorraine Warren with the Ouija board between us, and they were Anna Riva books, and so it was like more conjure art. And to be fair, like that's some pretty hardcore magic. It wasn't Scott Cunningham, it wasn't Silver Ravenwolf. Talking with Lorraine and getting her to agree. This was the triumph. Getting her to agree that the meaning of a symbol is in the eye of the person using it. So just because to Lorraine the Ouija board was necessarily a pathway to evil, we needed to go talk with the daughter and find out what she intended with it. Like, what was this to her? And that was incredibly important because when we did finally go in a non confrontational way talk with the daughter, we found out she'd never even used the damn Ouija board. It had been left to her by an aunt along with the witchcraft books. The aunt's practice had inspired her to learn some stuff. She wasn't quite into things the same way the aunt had been, and so she had put wards up in her room, and she had been cleansing her room, and she had been doing everything that a baby witch needed to do to try to stay safe in a house that was haunted and unpleasant. But because that doesn't fit with what a lot of people expect, Ouija boards are supposed to be portals to evil, no one got to see that ever. But I got Lorraine Warren to agree, at least for those 5 minutes, and that was a triumph. because we do not see eye to eye on that. Now, I totally get, like, she's a completely different generation. She was like, all of her perspectives were colored by her Catholic upbringing. She was incredibly Catholic. Um, and sometimes she was just wrong. She had expectations about how the world worked, and they were very colored by things that were more judgy than they were accurate. So I hold to, when you find something, don't go off of what you believe it's supposed to do. Go talk to the person who was using it. Find out from them. Okay, there's a pentacle on your floor underneath the rug. What's that about? Don't automatically jump to the, were you summoning Satan? Because chances are probably not.
I think I want to grab just one more
Okay.
question from the chat because I can hear your voice starting to get a
Yeah,
little scratchy over
it's
here.
doing the thing.
Um, so, how would you recommend that people go about banishing what they hope is a human spirit that freaked out their son?
Yeah.
Um, they've tried warding, but it seems like that's actually making it worse.
Okay.
How would you suggest approaching that?
Uh, my first thing would be, have you tried to talk to it in a friendly or at least open-minded fashion? Just wherever you notice the activity most, have a one-on-one and say, hey, I know you're here. But because warding and having it get worse makes me think that this is something that's really insistent, that wants to be there. And being insistent and pushy doesn't necessarily mean bad. It just may mean desperate. It may mean intent. It may mean that it just that its heart's in the right place and it's trying way too hard. So try to have a conversation, and in the course of that conversation, be really clear. You're bothering my son. Here's how you're scaring him. Here's what I'm worried about. If it is not your intention to be harmful or dangerous, I need you to stop doing that. If you're here because you want to be helpful, here's what you could do that would be better for me and my son. And see if it changes. Pay attention while you're having that conversation. They can hear you even if you can't hear them. So don't worry about, I'm not psychic enough to communicate with spirits. You can communicate with them just fine. It's a one-way radio. Uh, so put that out there while you're having that conversation. Just sort of pay attention to subtle things like how you feel, if the feel of the room changes, like anything that's going on. Try to separate yourself from your fear and your expectations that this is something that's bad, and just go in as open-minded as possible. If that doesn't work, the next step is give it a warning and say, I am not okay with your behavior. You are not welcome here. I want you to leave. I need you to leave. Me and my son alone. You can't be here anymore. Even if your intentions are good, you are causing trouble. This is my house. Get out. And if it continues to escalate and you're having trouble like warding and stuff with it, I mean, I might ask for outside help. The thing is I say that knowing that that is a mixed bag and that there are people who will cheerfully take you for a lot of money to just come in and like wave some sage around and tell you it's fine. And then 3 weeks later, it'll be back if it's not just, back that night. Reach out to somebody you trust, somebody you know has at least a little expertise and time, who's willing to give you some support on it. Um, if you are of a particular religious persuasion, uh, maybe enlist someone from that, like a priest, a priestess, whatever your particular flavor is. Ask your local rabbi and see if they have something that they can kind of loan you, a prayer, just a little bit of supportive words to give you a little bit of extra oomph. Failing that, never hurts to ask a higher power to help. You don't have to have another human being holding your hand. You can be like, okay, I'm trying to do it myself, but hey, please, anybody? Um, And if you don't believe in a higher power, honestly, what I have found to be the single most useful thing for working with spirits in houses, and maybe this sounds counterintuitive, calling on other spirits to deal with the spirits. They're already on that side. They can deal with it way better than you. They don't have to sleep. They're probably bored. And if it's like an ancestor, like you've got, if you ever have felt like you had a deceased relative looking out for you ever, call on them. Talk to them and say, "Hey, something's going on here. I'm not keen on it. It's bothering my son. Could you help?" If you're over there, if you are available, if you can come here and like either talk with it and reason with it on its own turf, or kick it out, please come and help. Be my spirit ally. Be my buddy on the other side. Seriously, why? I need to, yeah, just turn that one off. Because I read the thing that it's trying to remind me to read.
Perfect. You don't even have to do it.
Yeah.
All right.
I think that's everything. Yeah. And people are like, how do you do so many things? I've adopted some of my wife's techniques, which is to set myself alarms for some of the things that I'm occasionally forgetting to do.
And sometimes I set alarms for both of us.
Yeah, there's a lot.
I'm sorry.
I mean, well, God, like when you figure like I minister to like a bunch of people.
Yeah,
I've
try to say all the different
Okay,
things you do.
so I minister to a wider community of like mixed pantheistic like pagan something, and then like I'm
Okay.
founder and like prime advisor to House Keperu.
Uh-huh.
I write my books.
Yeah, only 35 of those so far. Ish.
I have one-on-one students whom I mentor. I do work with the Imasi, so people who are Keprian adjacent, who need to have questions answered because they're tied in with our great past life clusterfuck.
Okay.
Okay.
That's only 5 things. I'm pretty sure there's at least 7. You haven't mentioned TV.
Okay, yeah, I do the stuff on TV, different TV things. Good lord.
Let's see, where are you sitting right
I'm
now?
at Inspiration House, so there's that whole retreat house classes thing. I design classes. I do too much stuff.
I'm pretty sure there's like 2 more.
I'm sure there's more stuff. Actually, I'm like, what?
You know what?
What?
Music.
Oh yeah, I do music. I don't do so like I've done less of it, but yeah, I
Oh, we can totally remember to talk about all the things.
no, the music thing, like, okay, so legit, I work with Nox Arcana in music. They let me do my own little like solo album back in, this was 15 years ago, by the way.
Holy cow.
Yeah. But in 2006 and 2007, and you can take this to the bank and look it up on their site. I'm on a Billboard top 10 in both 2006 and 2007 through the album is called Winter's Night, Knight. The band is called Nox Arcana, and it's for of all things Christmas music. So I think I have too many hats.
We should really collect some of those for you to wear.
I didn't even talk about this awesome series of books.
Well, somebody was asking about that.
Okay, so I don't know if this is in print outside of this collection, but this is if like me you're a literature nerd, there's an author, Upton Sinclair, look him up. He's known for not writing about the paranormal, but he has a book called Mental Radio because his wife was psychic, and he did a lot of extensive experiments with his psychic wife because at first he was like, this is really weird. This is a fantastic book because it doesn't get as much coverage as it should. So look up Upton Sinclair, Mental Radio. You will thank me. This whole collection, which is the Collector's Library of the Unknown. I'm pretty sure it was one of those Time Life things back in the day. Uh, also has an Arthur Conan Doyle, The Edge of the Unknown. So the fellow who invented Sherlock was super into the paranormal. Believed in fairies, not unlike a lot of people on the British Isles. Maybe was a little gullible in some respects, but also pretty insightful in others. He's got a number of books on the paranormal, and this is one of them. And then the other fun one is somebody had been asking me about poltergeists, and probably one of the first books I read um, about a paranormal investigator, and this was even before I had discovered Hans Holzer, was Harry Price. He's a fellow who investigated the Borley Rectory. He had a whole bunch of stuff. He is a controversial figure. I mean, honestly, at this point, pretty much everybody is controversial in one way or another. But this is the most haunted house in England. But what I really recommend outside of this collection, if you look up Harry Price, find his book on Poltergeist. The version I found was Poltergeist with an exclamation point. And it's got a lot of like really neat core ideas. Get back to your paranormal roots if this is something that you're into. Absolutely look into Hans Holzer because he's pretty much where the idea of being a ghost hunter comes from. And we've really lost touch with this, but Holzer was somebody who worked regularly and directly with mediums and also witches and witchcraft and really saw a lot of overlap there and a lot of value in learning directly from witches about magic, uh, which, you know, Lorraine Warren, her school of thought in investigation, that's definitely not a path that she would have taken. And because the Warrens kind of became, I don't know, the exemplars of a lot of investigation in the past 20 years, certainly, Holzer's approach that was a lot more open-minded to different paths of understanding and different spiritualities has kind of gotten a little bit swept under the rug. And I strongly recommend poking around. Some of his stuff is being re-examined in the Holzer files, so that's worth taking a look at. But especially his collections of ghost stories and his work in the occult and in the paranormal. So there's, you know, I'm in a library and there's books and I love books. But also I am a haberdasher. I wear too many hats. Sometimes those hats are books.
Some of your hats. And with that, good night, everyone. Have a good night. We'll see you again soon.